In the United States, we often associate slavery exclusively with the South, but slavery was common in the Southwest too, especially in New Mexico. Traders captured and sold Native Americans to Hispanic families, a practice that continued up to and beyond the Civil War. They were called Genízaros. As more historians write about these stories, more people are embracing their own links to Genízaros. NMIF correspondent Megan Kamerick talked with two scholars at the University of New Mexico about what this means for New Mexico's history and identity.
Joining me today is Enrique Lamadrid. He's a distinguished professor emeritus of Spanish at the University of New Mexico. And Moises Gonzalez is an associate professor in community and regional planning at School of Architecture and Planning at UNM. They are working on a new book called Nación Genízara that will come out later this year from UNM Press. Enrique, who are the Genízaros? Who were they? Who are they?
Well, it's a secret that's been in broad daylight all these many years. By the 1790 census of New Mexico, fully a third of the population was Genízaro in their origins. And people that we would call Hispano, Nuevo Mexicano today, there's quite a large sector, and there's this whole heritage that's just been essentially erased since 1821, independence from Spain. They wanted to get rid of caste terms of any kind, and not that Genízaro was a caste, it was more like an ethnic term, but they got rid of that term at that point. And so historians have always assumed that the people disappeared, or their identity formation disappeared as well, which is not true.
So this meant they had indigenous background. So who was buying, who was selling, who was capturing?
Everybody was taking captives. It was a ubiquitous and universal practice even before Europeans came here. When the Spanish came here, they were very familiar with that kind of economy as well in the wars of the Reconquest with the Moors. There were no exact boundaries or frontiers to defend. They were always changing. So the purpose of warfare was to capture people. And they came over here, and similar things were happening here. They understood very well what was going on, and everybody was doing it. Everybody was taking each other's kids. That was the biggest prize in war is essentially women and children. And then as you move through history, the different enemy groups, the different wars that were going on, those would be the people that were essentially for sale. You could rescue them. You could go to trade fairs and pay their ransom, and of course that's the same thing as buying them, and they become the property of your family. They join your family.
Moises, you've researched your own Genízaro roots. Many people tried to hide those roots for a long time. Why was that, and is it changing now?
Well, I think, if you look at the land grant communities in northern New Mexico.
And real quick, just explain what land grants are.
Land grant was a process. So in the 1750s, around the 1750s, you had an explosion of the Genízaro population. And so there was one particular governor by the name of Tomás Vélez Gachupin. And he saw the way to move some of this population into permanent settlement was to have them move into borderland land grant communities. So basically there would be Genízaros, descendants of these captives that were moved into places like Cañón de Carnuel land grant, Las Huertas and Placitas.
They were the buffer between the frontier.
So yeah, basically there was this whole idea of creating a extent of the buffer land, of these buffer land settlements that would basically be at the borderlands of the Comancheria, the Apacheria, the Provincia de Navajo, which was the extension of a lot of the Navajo geography, as well as the Ute territory up in northern Colorado, northwestern New Mexico. As these communities evolved, they continued to take on, as they do today, their own brand of indigenous identity outside of what we call the traditional Hispano or Pueblo constructs of identity.
Are these revelations now that are coming out about Genízaros, are they controversial among Hispanics?
Well, I
Native
think
Americans?
within a lot of these land grant settlements, it's things that we've been doing for generations, so it's nothing entirely new. I think because since the 1900s, we have this whole creation of what is New Mexico Hispanic identity that's been put forth in terms of this myth of the Spanish legacy. So I think now that in modern times that people are exploring these topics of slavery, these topics of going deeper into what New Mexico identity is, people are coming to explore this. So although it might be something that is becoming known to the broader New Mexican population, in various communities, it's something that's been practiced for generations.
How widespread was slavery in the Southwest, Enrique?
It was widespread enough to become an article in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Mexico,
In 1848.
In 1848, Mexico tried so hard to deal with this problem in northern Mexico, and they were relieved in many ways to turn over the problem to the United States of America with the provision that if the United States redeems or gets back any Mexican captives, can they please be returned to their families in the South? So it's a huge problem, and it's a huge practice. Everybody was doing it. The retaliation was going back and forth. And New Mexico was for many, many decades a war zone. It's vulnerable. People weren't settling together in defensible communities the way the new laws of the Indies instructed them to do. They would put their communities out there where their lands and herds were, and they paid the price because all you have to do is look at the map. There are maps of New Mexico, some beautiful maps. The 1778, 1779 Bernardo Miera y Pacheco maps, and he had a key on those maps. He would indicate buildings and churches and stuff in all the little communities, and if there was a line drawn through the square on the map, it means it was a ruin. And in that time, at that particular point in time, many of the buildings in Santa Fe were in ruins. All of the buildings in the Chama Valley were in ruins. The Chama Valley had been completely abandoned. Everybody came back in, and so that they were really, really hard times. And so who are the Genízaros? There are people from all those tribal backgrounds that were having conflicts with the state here, that were having warfare with the state. So little Ute kids, little Apache kids, later on little Navajo kids, clear into the 19th century, were the next generation of slaves, essentially.
Moises, I've read a lot of articles and research coming out on this. Most of the voices in the articles so far seem to be men. Are women researching their Genízaro roots?
Yeah, I mean, I think just, in terms of, we put this, and there's actually authors in the anthology that take on their own personalized history. And the history is pretty clear that those that received most of the violence were women. And also in terms of young children, and the violence was portrayed. One of the authors in this book, Virginia Sanchez, a lot of what she talks about in the book was the impact of Ute slavery in southern Colorado, but some of her past work dealt with women and captives at Fort Union during the American occupation, and all the orphans that were held there that were adopted in families in Mora. One of which is my great grandma, which was held as Lost Dollar family, was a young baby orphan at Fort Union during the forced occupations of the Apache So Virginia is one that's really, I'm really excited in the book, taking on some of these stories of captive women.
As you said, Genízaros are not gone.
No,
you
we're
have
here.
Genízaro roots. They're here today. Where do we see evidence of that culture today?
It's in a lot of the land grant settlements. If you go to Ranchos de Taos, which is in the Cristobal La Serna, right in the New Year's, you'll see Comanches dance there. You can go to Abiquiu during the Santo Tomas. In all across the Sandia communities, ranging from Placitas, which is the Comanches, into the North Sandia Mountains, you'll see dances, versions of the Comanchitos and Comanche dances. Even the Matachines, which is a shared dance between Genízaro communities and also various pueblos. Even as far as Tortugas Pueblo in southern New Mexico, you'll see variations of the Matachines. So it's still being danced and done, and through ritual practices and through governance and self-recognition through a lot of settlements in New Mexico.
Why is that self-recognition important in terms of keeping that history alive and not erasing it as it was the Spanish and the Mexicans tried to do?
Yeah, indigenous identity is a very complex, even convoluted topic. There are many tribal groups in the U.S., some of them quite large, like the Lumbees in the Carolinas, that have fought for federal recognition for years and years. There's a lot that comes with federal recognition. But the important thing about Genízaro communities, those communities who have retained that identity, who have passed it on to their descendants, you see that identity survival in these outlying settlements like Abiquiu, even the two settlements near Albuquerque, Carnoy and the Placitas area. Of course, the original Genízaro land grant was in Belen, a very, very dangerous area. But the important thing here is that these communities that celebrate Genízaro identity recognize themselves. They're not out for federal recognition, or they're not, they recognize themselves, and self-recognition is an important part of this equation. They have been recognized by the state of New Mexico, interestingly. 10 years ago, there was a joint memorial passed, written by one of our authors, a former state historian, Esteban Rael Galvez, that just outlines the cultural and political and military contributions of Genízaros in New Mexico since the 18th century.
As we near the end of our talk, tell me why you wanted to write this book. Why is this important to bring this forward?
Well, I think one is that like Enrique was saying, given the context of New Mexico in 1790s, that either one could probably, back to colonial times, one could probably trace, even though they're not from a Genízaro settlement, they're probably a product of some of this inter-exchange. One, for Genízaro communities to express and say, despite what the Mexican government tried to do, the United States education system has tried to do, under this idea of the tricultural myth, we exist. We don't abide by this construct of the tricultural harmonious existence between Pueblo, Hispanic, and Anglo culture. We exist out of that imaginary, and we exist through a history of violence and trauma. But we celebrate that in our identity as our own brand of indigeneity in New Mexico.